Kathy.
Shannon, you know what? Did you know that women can also be psychopaths?
You know, I feel like we've talked about that a couple times.
I think it's funny when Hollywood portrays female psychopaths because they can't help but throw some little wrench in there that makes me go, yeah, they're not fully psychopathic, because they can't help themselves to throw in some nurturing or something that makes you go, I don't know if that would be accurate.
I'm not so sure.
Well, today on the show, we're going to talk about the Kill Bill series, franchise. I don't know. There's only 2 of them. More specifically around Uma Thurman's character, Beatrix Kiddo, or the bride, or the Black Mamba, depending on what you want to refer to as.
Who you know her as.
I'm also going to talk about her in relationship to Bill and the other women that were also involved in this whole group. But I thought it'd be easier to focus more so on her character and whether we think she actually depicts true psychopathy, or maybe there's a blend or a mix, or, you know, we talk about things on a continuum. Although with psychopathy tends to be an extension of antisocial personality disorder, which means that these are folks who, I'll break it down very simplistically, it's people who have antisocial personality disorder, but to like the 10th degree.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would argue some people put antisocial personality disorder and psychopathy together. I would not, just because theoretically I follow Robert Hare, who did, you know, specific studies on there's sort of this extra layer that creates an even more dangerous and sophisticated type of person, that it is rooted in antisocial personality disorder. The research is pretty limited when we're looking up women with regard to psychopathy. And I think it's because when we, even from like a layman's standpoint, we think of psychopathy as just unemotional, reptilian, reactive, impulsive, violent, lacking empathy, callous, exploiting others. Generally, we have an easier time assigning that to men, not because, I mean, we don't really know if there's more male psychopaths than there are females, but I can say in the characters that we see on television, I think we're just more comfortable and we're more used to seeing men that way. Now, it is changing, but what I've noticed is when I'm watching women in those psychopathic roles, give or take a couple, there's usually some sort of emotional current that makes it a little bit different. It's like they have a hard time just making them like fully unremorseful and unempathic and unattuned.
I feel like the culture at large understands psychopathy as power, a power over us.
That's a great way to look at it. Yeah.
And assigning power to women is a dicey thing.
It is.
So why would they, you know what I mean? So
yes.
That connection wouldn't make any sense.
Yes.
In general.
And I would say that I see that more so in American films than I will see in like European films. One of my biggest, I don't want to digress too much, but to just give an example to that, and Shannon, you know how I already feel about this, but the Swedish version of Girl with the Dragon Tattoo versus the American version of Girl with the Dragon Tattoos, the original Lisbeth was pretty fucking raw and buff and just really abrasive, harsh, unremorseful, revengeful. And then, you know, the American version.
And is that way in the books too.
And is that way in the book. And then the American version is done and they choose someone who's like 95 pounds and not very threatening and far less likely to fit the character that was written in the book.
Just acting wise, like even if we don't look at physicality, I just feel like the portrayal of it was so much less powerful, psychopathic, you know what I mean? Like it just didn't, the way it was portrayed or directed or acted or whatever it was, it just didn't have that same visceral fear and pain and intimidation that you would have had with that original character.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that I had a visceral reaction to with the remake because it sort of cheapened who this character was in the book. And Noomi Rapace played she did a lot of preparation for that role. So anyway, Maybe it's an American thing, I'm not sure. But historically, when we think about female psychopaths, what we tend to attribute to the majority of their traits is, you know, someone who might be more relational in the sense that they become easily jealous or parasitic. There might be even some borderline personality components to their psychopathy. There could be drug use. There could be levels of seduction.
The histrionics.
The borderline personality. And we know that, like, we've done a whole series on female psychopaths, which we've pulled from characters like that, such as Play Misty for Me and Single White Female. We've talked about some of those, right? And we've also made distinguishment in those episodes about, is this person truly a psychopath, or are we seeing something else? So I think sometimes that gets lost. But that's typically what we are talking about. So female psychopaths, they're not all like Glenn Close's character in Fatal Attraction, though.
No.
Right? And they can actually be as violent and cunning and calculated as their male counterparts. We just don't usually see that. And I think that one of the things that I appreciate the most about the Kill Bill series is that Quentin Tarantino kind of went all in. And although her character does have some nurturing components, and we'll talk about that in a while and why that maybe works, and whether we can even look at that as true empathy. That's a whole other conversation. I did appreciate the rawness of this and watching it as an action movie that didn't have like this side love story or something else going on. And even though there was a component of that, you know, she kind of took Bill down.
Well, yeah, and he doesn't waste a lot of time. Even though his style, it can be very like on and on and on. He likes to, but I always experience it as he likes to tell big stories with lots of characters and lots of talking, right? But I don't experience the plot as being slow.
Not at all.
In other words, he takes the bride, and in the first 20 minutes, he gives her a trauma story upon a trauma story upon a trauma story, and you just know exactly where she's coming from, and then we're off to the races and all the action.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the story, it's fast. It's fast paced, and you're not caught up in these like the nuances of things. But he also does a really good job giving you a backstory of how she came to be. Before we get into talking about her and some of these other folks, I do think that we have something I'd like to start with. Billy Facts with Girl. Billy Facts with Kath.
Yeah, in case you couldn't understand.
Not to be focused on just Bill himself, but on the series.
So in case you don't know, Kathy gives us some facts, or some questions actually, and then at the end of the show, she'll give us the answers.
The bride's yellow jumpsuit is an homage to blank from the film Blank.
Okay. Thank you.
In Kill Bill Volume 1, there is a message on the bottom of the bride's shoe for a brief moment. What does it say? Number 3. Why did Tarantino put the movie on hold when the script was finished?
Because he's a perfectionist.
Number 4. What is the opening quote in Kill Bill Volume 1?
Okay.
And lastly, number 5. What brand of cigarettes are smoked throughout Kill Bill Volume 2?
All right. Thank you very much. We'll get the answers to those in a little bit.
All right. So I'm going to start with the plot of the movie, starting with Volume 1. So in 1999, the bride, who is played by Uma Thurman, who has a few different aliases, the bride being one. She's also called the Black Mamba. All the women in this whole assassin squad have different snakes as and hers is the Black Mamba. She's also, supposedly her name is Beatrix Kiddo. So that's another name that they use. So the bride, a former member of the Deadly Viper assassination squad, is rehearsing her marriage at a chapel in El Paso, Texas. The Deadly Vipers, led by Bill, attack the chapel, shooting everyone. As the bride lies wounded, she tells Bill he is the father of her unborn child, just as he shoots her in the head. So she falls into a coma. In the hospital, Elle Driver, which will come up later, she's one of the Deadly Vipers, prepares to assassinate her through a lethal injection, but Bill aborts the mission, considering it's dishonorable to kill her while she is defenseless. So then she wakes up 4 years later to find out that she's no longer pregnant. And she does a number of very violent things to get out of the hospital. And she plans her revenge against the squad that she was once a part of, who Bill led. And her goal is to take them out one by one until she gets to Mr. Bill, right? Which we don't see much of until volume 2.
Great little script.
We have a few characters that I want to just introduce while we're talking about the squad, because there are actually 4 women. There's Bill, and then there's Bud. Okay. Who's a whole other. Michael Madsen in this movie
love him so much.
His house, his trailer is literally his trash.
One of the best things Tarantino ever did was to revive these careers of like John Travolta, Michael Madsen.
He did such a great job.
Amazing.
So in the first volume, we see mostly Vernita Green, who's played by Vivica Fox, and Oren Ishii, played by Lisa Liu. And they are 2 of the squad members. So Vernita, just to give you a little bit about her, if you're unfamiliar, member of this deadly assassin squad. So Vernita is the first home she visits. She shows up at Vernita's door, and Vernita offers her inside, and Vernita's face is looking at her like, oh shit, like you're supposed to be dead, right? And very long story short, a bloodbath ensues. And this is the first really great scene in the film where you get an idea of who Beatrix is, where she's come from, and just the level of assassin that these women are. And I know many of you have probably seen this movie by now, but I went back and watched it, and watching it for this episode, it was even more enjoyable because I'm watching it from, these are 2 badass women who the choreography and all of the special effects that make them look like they're flying through the air. So not only is it amazing, it's hilarious.
It is. They're amazing. It's so good.
And they take basic, like domesticated, and this is where Tarantino brings his humor in. It's like they're in a house, in a kitchen, and they're fighting with like kitchen weapons, which is such a woman thing without being offensive. It was really, really good.
Yeah.
So we start to see like, oh man, this woman really was a part of something big. But I would say that my favorite villain in volume 1 is Oshin. And this is Lisa Liu. And this character, she's a Japanese American deadly viper and the queen of Tokyo's underworld. So what we know about from her childhood is that her father was a sergeant major in the United States Army, and her mother was a faithful housewife. And what is so great about her character is she's running this meeting, and someone insults her, and she essentially takes his head off because she doesn't want to be looked down upon because she's half white. And this whole conversation that happens, you can tell literally how psychopathic she is just because her reaction is based on the fact that he insulted her race.
Yeah.
And she basically was like, if anybody comes at me and blames me for being half American, this head will end up on a platter. So this gives us a really good background into who this woman was affiliated with. But now she's had this change of heart. She comes out of this, 4-year coma. Her baby's dead. And she's trying to get away from this life that she was leading. She's apparently trying to clean up her act and get away from Bill. However, it's hard to determine really what her motivation. So like there's these superficial attempts at moral transformation, but it seems like throughout the film that even when there's this opportunity is presented to make the right choice, she doesn't really get there. And I think that the way that I perceive her is that she's not truly motivated by remorse or guilt or shame, or even empathy or reflection, but more so intellect. She's trying to move out of this because it's no longer practical for her.
Huh.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So because when there are moments for her to turn her life around, she still somehow gets herself and has these reactions that someone who otherwise maybe with empathy or with some sort of insight or proper judgment would maybe just walk away. And she doesn't do that, which tells me there's a part of her that still very much enjoys, almost maybe from like an addiction, not necessarily because she's pretending, but more so she can't fully remove herself from it. If I look at her personality, and this is taken from an article that I looked at, she's single-minded, she's deadly, she's very compassionate about whatever it is that she's doing. She has endured a lot of pain through being affiliated with Bill. Bill brought her into a life. We don't know much about her childhood, but we know that people don't just get there. They don't, there's something must have happened that this was alluring to her.
Mm-hmm.
She's also a mother.
And capacity for it, right? Like,
yeah.
Are we capable of administering this kind of vengeance, revenge, anger, death?
She ends up doing this extensive training with this master, Pai Mei, and these scenes are amazing. There's more of that in volume 2, and I'm not going this, we're not doing an episode on Kill Bill so much, but her ability to focus and become a really brilliant assassin is pretty awesome.
For real.
She starts to use what she's learned against the people that she's now, casting her revenge upon. But there's this whole other side to her because she is a mother, and she shows this nurturing side. And she's also shown to be vulnerable at times. They talk about in certain scenes how she cries, right? But psychopaths cry. So that's not totally unusual. What I sometimes struggle with is the motivation behind the crying. I'm not exactly sure. But she has also gone through a lot and has a lot of trauma. So I think sometimes when I look at her character, I often wonder, are we sitting with a real psychopath? Or Shannon, do you think that this is layered with some other things? Are we maybe looking at a sociopath? Are we looking at someone who's just engaging in a full-on revenge fantasy because someone has fucked with her life and with her child and she just got caught up? Like, what evidence do you think we have that she is a stone-cold psychopath?
Well, the evidence for is the capacity for it, the fact that she goes into that. With a lot of training, but that, like, anybody can be trained, and there's different, you don't have to be like a kung fu psychopath, like that's
true.
That's just what was happening. She could have poisoned them all, like all of our female serial killers from history that we've been doing a series on. I have a much more like argument against. It's like the switch got flipped of disconnect because of trauma, and then the capacity to do all of these things and continue to do all of these things out of a revenge place and become a high-level assassin. It's like you would have to have some sociopathy for sure to be able to disconnect from that. But was she always that person? I don't think so. I feel like it was that switch got flipped, instead of, oh, this 11-year-old is evil and has no emotion, and from birth it's going to be turned into something like, if we look at what you always talk about, which is just like the way her brain functions and what she's got in her brain. As we know, that switch can get flipped or not depending on all of your protective factors and stuff. And I just think that trauma flipped that switch, and maybe she had a propensity for it that was never going to be activated.
Right.
And it got activated.
Well, and then with all this extra trauma that happened, one of the questions that I have is, she's left for dead. She wakes up. But if she never would have been left for dead, if she never would have gone through this 4-year coma, lost her child, would she have had this quote unquote change of heart? Right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing I think about is, we talk about her being a mother and being nurturing, but we also know, and we have a great interview coming up this upcoming season that you'll all be happy about, but we know from serial killers and psychopaths in real life, that some of them have relationships.
Yeah.
And that these relationships are fulfilling, and these are people who they would not harm.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes that gets lost on people too, is just because they have 1 or 2 or 3 people in their life that they would defend with their life doesn't remove the fact that they could be psychopathic.
Yeah, and I understand that with the hitman job layered on top of that she's using as a revenge piece, but for a lot of these other women it's a job.
It's a job.
Yeah. And so we're seeing her personal motivations for that job, but you lay that piece on top of it, and what we know is that sort of the isolation of it, not having relationships, disavowing herself of all connection, all the things. But we see her desire for it. That's in conflict, because I do think that people, as we know, confuse mental illness with psychopathy. Mm-hmm. And so somebody who is more mentally ill, and then that leads to a more disorganized presentation, might not have all of this ability to conduct themselves like this is a job. Whereas she would be, if we were going to argue that way, an organized psychopath that was born out of trauma. I guess.
And many of them are.
Yeah.
Going back to what I was talking about earlier in the show around some of these traits that we usually see in female psychopaths, she doesn't fit many of those. She's not the Sharon Stone seductive type. She's not the borderline emotional, jealous, parasitic type.
The obsessive,
No. In fact, if anything, she's the more reactive, physically violent, kind of isolating type. Mm-hmm. She really fits more of how we would see a male psychopath, a Patrick Bateman, somebody like that.
More able for Quentin to write that.
Yes.
More in his wheelhouse.
And less narcissistic than Bateman. I don't see a lot. I mean, I don't see a lot of narcissism personally.
No.
I just see a stone cold, unremorseful
mission,
reptilian.
I guess that's the way you could say she's obsessive, because she's really on this mission.
Yeah.
And she's obsessively on the
she's obsessively
single-mindedly focused.
Yeah.
That's really where the serial killer mind kind of comes into focus when you're watching this. He's done a really great job of, obviously creating a fictional psychology, but blending enough of what, and this is his talent, enough of what the culture believes and what the culture thinks is true, putting it in the character so that it seems convincing, even though if you're to dissect it, of course, it's much more boring if you do it from a from a psychological realness. It reminds me of Silence of the Lambs, because that's a very fictionalized psychopathy.
Well, and I also, going back to this obsessive thought that you had too, is she is a perfectionist in every step of the way, from her training through everything that she does. And her biggest challenge and her biggest goal in this is to kill Bill.
Yeah.
So only the strictest discipline is going to allow her to get there. And this is where that obsession for her is a protective factor, because she isn't going to give up. This obsession, this perfectionist, this strict discipline ultimately gets her to what she wants. So it's enabling in that way, right? Mm-hmm. She'll kill anybody who stands in the way.
Makes for a fun movie.
It makes for a fun movie. Mm-hmm. And people who aren't psychopathic may not have allowed themselves to endure the amount. She went through a lot.
Yeah.
Right? She took a beating.
Yes.
Lost a kid.
Yes.
Was raped. All of those things. Mm-hmm. Kept going. Mm-hmm. It just fed her.
Yeah.
Where people who may have had more emotion attached may have quit a long time ago.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, she had to have a certain amount of compartmentalization to be able to compartmentalize all that violence.
Yeah.
And then go forward to choose that the thing that would make her feel better would be to kill all the people.
To keep going, to keep killing.
Yeah.
Most people would be like, I can't look at this anymore. I have to stop. This is too much.
No. Any kind of emotional, like average emotional palate isn't going to be able to do that.
Yeah. So I don't know.
That's an argument for.
She's pretty violent, but she's pretty fucking fun to watch.
She is really fun to watch. Was it fun to revisit these?
It was.
Movies.
They're so easy to get through because there's so much great humor in these two. And Daryl Hannah, I didn't talk much about her character on this episode, but I could do a whole episode on her character. She's so fun.
She is. Vivica Fox is fun for a minute.
Yeah.
No, they're all really great. I remember seeing these movies in the theater.
They're all great in this. The cast is amazing, but I think that Daryl Hannah's character in number 2, I think it's number 2 when she goes into Michael Madsen's, that whole scene where he dies, hilarious.
They're great.
So anyway.
They're fun to throw on.
I know we have some answers to get to, but I would definitely throw her in the psychopathy department.
Okay, great. I don't know.
The bride's yellow jumpsuit is an homage to blank from this film blank.
I Shawshank Redemption? I don't know.
Bruce Lee.
Oh, okay. Yeah, of course.
From the film Game of Death.
Yeah, very good movie. If you like that sort of thing.
In Kill Bill Volume 1, there is a message on the bottom of the bride's shoe. Kind of flashes for a brief moment. She's walking across the table. What does it say?
Doesn't it say fuck you on it?
It does.
Oh, okay. I'm like, there's so many times. I'm like, was it in the car? No, but her, because she doesn't have shoes on in the car.
It's so funny. She walks across that glass table and you can just see.
I love those little bumblebee shoes she's got on. They're like yellow and black, right?
They're yellow.
Yeah.
Well, it's the one that Bruce Lee wore.
There you go.
Why did Tarantino put the movie on hold when the script was finished?
I really don't know.
Uma was pregnant.
No, Uma.
With her daughter who's now like 20 something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Her daughter's great too.
I do remember when she was having those kids with Ethan Hawke.
Mm-hmm. Number 4, what is the opening? Maya Hawke, that's the daughter's name. What is the opening quote in Kill Bill Volume 1?
That's a great name, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Something about one left or something. Doesn't it say there's like a card on the screen that says something about there's only one left?
No. Revenge is a dish best served cold.
Okay.
And then what brand of cigarettes are smoked throughout Kill Bill Volume 2?
Red Apple.
American Spirits.
Oh, I thought that was a fake brand named Red Apple. Maybe I'm wrong. Wrong movie. Well, whatever. There is only one left, though, at the beginning of Kill Bill, right? Only one left to kill.
Yeah.
At the beginning of 2.
Yeah, there's a few different quotes in that movie, but that's the opening.
Just picked one.
Yeah.
Yeah, these movies were really fun to watch when I revisited them. I remember seeing them in the movie theater, and it was a very enjoyable movie theater experience, I must tell you, because although his movies are known for being very heavily dialogued, there are some stunning visuals in 2, for sure. Yeah, it's really stunning visuals. So
the scenes in the club. Yeah, with all of the different swords and the choreography, and they're funny. I mean, as grotesque as they are, they're funny because they're so absurd.
Yeah, no, he's always got a bunch of humor, and a lot of those old, he was getting into all these kung fu movies, and that's the inspiration, obviously. But if you watch kung fu movies from back in the day, a lot of them are really funny. Bruce Lee movies are really funny. All of the sound effects and stuff. And he actually, obviously many of the scenes are very serious, but it's got more of a Jackie Chan feel to it than you think when you watch old Bruce Lee movies. There's some of them that are pretty amusing. It's almost like slapstick violence.
It is. But you're right. I mean, those last couple of scenes, especially in the second one between her and Bill, the dialogue is great. The acting is great. The emotion is great. It's all these confusing feelings. There's a child in another room. It's so brilliantly done.
Yeah, some of his best work, in my opinion. He's made a lot of great ones. But thank you so much for that, Kathy.
Welcome.
Thank you, everyone, so much for listening. We will catch you next week. This has been an episode of Terror Talk. My name is Shannon.
And I'm Kathy. Sleep safe, everyone.